I came to my son's for Thanksgiving, but he said, "Who invited you? This is family only." I left and canceled 44 payments for his rent. The next morning, he was already standing at my doorstep. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Dorothy Harris. Most people call me Dot. I am 68 years old. I live alone in the house where I raised my children, and until last Thanksgiving, I believed, truly believed, that my family loved me. I want you to understand what my life looked like before everything fell apart, because it matters. It matters that I was not some distant, cold woman who deserved to be pushed away. I was the kind of mother who showed up. I drove 3 hours to watch my grandson Tyler's Little League games in the rain. I sent birthday cards with handwritten notes inside, not just a check. I kept a key to Kevin's house on my key ring for 6 years because he asked me to. Said it made him feel safe knowing I was close. I cooked. I cleaned when I visited. I babysat without being asked. I loved that family with everything I had. My late husband, Gerald, passed 8 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. After he died, I did what many widows in their 60s do. I made myself useful. I reorganized my finances carefully. Gerald had left me comfortable, not rich, but stable. We owned our home outright, had savings, and Gerald had invested wisely in a small rental property on Clover Street, just 4 blocks from where Kevin and Brittany lived with their 2 kids, Tyler, 14, and Madison, 11. That rental property became the center of everything. 2 years after Gerald died, Kevin came to me with a proposition. He and Brittany wanted to expand her home staging business. They needed a dedicated workspace, somewhere close to home, somewhere affordable. Kevin sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he'd eaten 10,000 dinners as a boy, and he asked if they could rent the Clover Street property. He said they'd pay market rate. He showed me a number, $1,800 a month. I looked it up later. Market rate at the time was closer to $2,200. But he was my son. I said yes without negotiating. That was 3.5 years ago. In those 3.5 years, I received 44 rent payments. Every one of them came on time. I will give him that. But looking back now, I can see that those payments were not an act of good faith. They were a leash, a way of making me feel like the arrangement was normal and fair, while other things, quieter things, were changing around me. The first warning sign came about 18 months in. I stopped being invited to Sunday dinners. It wasn't announced. There was no conversation. The invitations simply stopped arriving. When I called Kevin to ask about it, he said they'd been doing more low-key weekends lately. He said it casually, the way you'd explain switching coffee brands. I told myself it was nothing. The second sign came when Madison stopped calling me Grandma Dot and started calling me Dorothy. I noticed it one afternoon when I dropped off a birthday gift. She said, "Thanks, Dorothy," and looked at her mother. Brittany smiled at the wall. I drove home with a strange, hollow feeling in my chest that I could not name. The third sign, and this one I should have acted on immediately, came in September, 2 months before Thanksgiving. I ran into Brittany at the grocery store. We were in the same aisle. She saw me. I know she did. And she turned her cart around and went the other way. No wave. No hello, nothing. Like I was a stranger. Like I was worse than a stranger. Because you at least acknowledge strangers out of politeness. I told myself I was imagining things. That is what we do, isn't it? We protect the people we love by finding excuses for them. We smooth over the cracks so we don't have to look at what's underneath. Then Thanksgiving came. I had not been explicitly invited, that is true, but I had never needed an invitation before. For 40 years, Thanksgiving meant family, and family meant showing up. I baked my sweet potato casserole, Gerald's mother's recipe, and I drove the 12 minutes to Kevin's house on Maple Grove Drive. I rang the doorbell with a dish in both hands and a smile on my face. Kevin opened the door. He looked at me the way you look at a stranger who has knocked on the wrong house. Then his expression shifted into something harder. "Mom," his voice was flat. "What are you doing here?" "I brought the casserole," I said. "I always bring the casserole." He stepped onto the porch and pulled the door almost closed behind him. Through the gap, I could hear voices, laughter, the sound of football on television, the smell of turkey. My grandchildren were inside that house. "This is just for family this year," he said. I stared at him. "Kevin, I am family." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said quietly, as though it were perfectly reasonable, "Brittany's family is here. It would be awkward. You should have called first." He took the casserole dish from my hands, and he went back inside. And he closed the door. I stood on that porch for what felt like a very long time. The cold air moved around me. Through the window, I could see the warm light of the dining room, the shapes of people sitting down together, and I understood, standing there holding nothing, my hands suddenly empty, that I had been erased. I walked back to my car. I sat in the driveway for 3 minutes. Then I drove home. That night, I did not cry. I made tea. I sat at Gerald's old armchair, and I began, for the first time in my life, to count exactly what I had given and exactly what I had received in return. The house was very quiet that night. It is always quiet since Gerald died, but that particular quiet, Thanksgiving night, alone, had a weight to it that pressed against my ribs like something physical. I did not turn on the television. I did not call my sister Carol in Phoenix, though I wanted to. I sat with a legal pad from Gerald's old desk drawer and a pen, and I started writing. At the top of the page, I wrote, "What is real? Not what I had assumed, not what I had hoped. What was actually, verifiably real, real." Kevin and Brittany had been renting my property for 3.5 years, 44 payments of $1,800. That was $79,200 they had paid me, against a market value that, over the same period, would have yielded closer to $97,000. The gap was nearly $18,000. I had gifted them that difference without a word, without a thank you, without acknowledgement that it was a gift at all. Real. In 3.5 years, Kevin had visited me alone, without Brittany, without the children, exactly 4 times. I remembered each one because I had been so relieved when it happened. Once when my furnace broke. Once when I had a minor car accident and needed a ride home. Twice at Christmas, briefly, because Brittany's family was at a different gathering. Every visit had a functional reason. None of them were simply because he wanted to see his mother. Real. My grandchildren, Tyler and Madison, had not been brought to my house in over a year. The last time I saw them for more than 30 minutes was the previous Thanksgiving. And even then, Brittany had spent the afternoon on her phone and had hustled them out before dessert. Real. I had been locked out of a holiday I had hosted for decades, told I was not family, and handed back my own casserole dish like a delivery driver being dismissed. I looked at that legal pad for a long time. Here is what fear feels like when you are 68 and alone. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It creeps in quietly, sits down beside you, and whispers that perhaps the problem is you. Perhaps you are too much. Perhaps they are simply living their lives, and you are the one who cannot let go. Perhaps Kevin is right, and you should have called first. I let that voice speak for about 10 minutes. I recognized it. I had heard it many times over the past 18 months, every time I explained away a warning sign. It was the voice that kept me manageable, kept me grateful for crumbs. Then I picked up the pen and wrote at the bottom of the page, "No, not angry, not dramatic, just no." I was not too much. I was a mother who had supported her son financially, emotionally, and practically for his entire adult life. I was a woman who had been told, plainly and without apology, that I was not considered family. Those two facts could not coexist without a consequence, and I was the only one in a position to create that consequence: the rental property. That was the hinge point. I pulled out my lease agreement from the filing cabinet in the second bedroom. Gerald had always kept documents meticulously organized, and I had maintained his system. I read through it carefully. The lease was month to month, which Kevin had preferred because, he said, it gives us flexibility. I had agreed because it seemed reasonable at the time. Now I understood that the flexibility had only ever run in one direction. There was a 30-day notice clause. Either party could terminate the lease with 30 days written notice. I was the other party. That night, I did not make any calls. I did not send any messages. I made myself a second cup of tea, put on my reading glasses, and I went through every financial record I had connected to Kevin and Brittany over the past 4 years. The rent payments, 2 separate personal loans I had given them when Brittany's business had slow seasons, a contribution I had made toward Tyler's private school enrollment fee that Kevin had described as an investment in your grandson's future. The total, when I added it up carefully, was just over $96,000 in direct financial support, not counting the below-market rent. $96,000, and I had been turned away from Thanksgiving. My plan, in its first form, was simple and entirely within my legal rights. I would give notice on the lease. 30 days. They would need to find a new property for Brittany's business. The loss of that below-market space would cost them significantly. Comparable commercial space in that area ran between $2,400 and $2,800 a month. It would also force a conversation, one that could not be avoided by simply closing a front door. But I did not move yet. Not that night. I had spent decades making decisions out of love and impulse. This time, I wanted to be certain. I wanted to understand exactly what I was doing and why, so that when the moment came, I could stand behind it completely. I put the legal pad in the filing cabinet next to the lease. I went to bed. I did not sleep well, but I slept with the particular quiet of a woman who has made up her mind. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I called my attorney. Her name is Susan Patel, and I have known her for 11 years. She handled Gerald's estate, helped me refinance the house, and reviewed the original lease agreement when Kevin first proposed the arrangement. She is thorough, she is direct, and she does not waste my time with reassurances. She asks questions, and she waits for complete answers. I sat in her office on Birchwood Avenue that Tuesday afternoon with my folder of documents: the lease, the rent records, the written loan agreements, my handwritten accounting from Thanksgiving night, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You haven't contacted Kevin since Thursday?" she asked. "No." "He hasn't contacted you?" "Not a word." She nodded slowly. "The lease termination is completely straightforward. 30 days written notice, delivered by certified mail or hand delivery. The only complexity is the personal loans. Do you have the signed agreements?" I slid them across the desk. She read them carefully. "These are properly executed," she said. "Both have repayment terms. He's current on payments?" "He has been. $200 a month on each, which covers the interest but barely touches the principal. At this rate, they'd be paid off in approximately 9 years. Susan looked at me over her reading glasses. Dorothy, these loan balances total nearly $17,000. If you're considering accelerating repayment as part of this, that's well within your rights under the terms written here. The clause on page 2 of each agreement allows you to call the full balance due with 60 days' notice in the event of material change in the borrower's circumstances. I had not noticed that clause. Gerald's lawyer had written it in years before. I had never thought I would need it. And the property? I asked. 30 days. I can draft the notice today. She did. I signed it before I left her office. I paid her fee, which was modest and worth every cent. And I walked out into the cold November air with a certified notice in a sealed envelope addressed to Kevin and Brittany Harris at the Clover Street address. I mailed it on the way home. Certified mail, return receipt requested. I want to tell you what happened next, because it taught me something important about people who believe they have power over you. The moment you act without anger, without drama, without warning, they become frightened. They cannot locate your weakness because you have stopped performing it for them. 3 days after I mailed the notice, Kevin called. Not a text, a phone call. His voice was careful, measured, the tone he used when he wanted something. Hey, Mom, just calling to check in. A pause. Haven't heard from you since the holiday. I kept my voice pleasant. I'm well, Kevin. How are the kids? We talked for 4 minutes about nothing meaningful. He did not mention Thanksgiving. I did not mention the notice, which would not have arrived yet. When he hung up, I understood. Brittany had noticed something. Perhaps a change in my demeanor when we passed on the street. Perhaps, simply, the silence. I had not called, had not sent the usual Sunday text message I'd sent every week for years. They had felt the absence of my effort like a draft under a door. The notice arrived 2 days later. I know because I tracked the certified mail online. That evening, my phone rang 11 times between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. Kevin. Kevin. Brittany. Kevin. A number I didn't recognize. Brittany's sister, I suspected. Kevin again. I answered none of them. The following morning, a text from Kevin. Mom, we need to talk. This is serious. Please call me. Then Brittany, which was notable because she had not texted me directly in over a year. Dorothy, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. We should clear this up. I read both messages carefully. I noticed several things. Kevin said we need to talk, making himself the center, as always. Brittany used the word misunderstanding, already constructing a narrative in which this was an error rather than a decision. Neither of them said, I'm sorry about Thanksgiving, not one word. That was the moment I would later identify as the point of no return. Not the evening on the porch, not signing the notice at Susan's office. This moment, reading those texts, seeing what was missing from them, was when I understood completely what the past 3 years had actually been. I had not been a mother to Kevin. I had been a resource. And a resource, when it stops flowing, needs to be repaired, not respected. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I made breakfast. I did not call back. On the 15th day after delivering the notice, I drove to the Clover Street property. I want to be clear about what I found and why it mattered. I was not looking for a fight. I was exercising my rights as a property owner, doing a standard walkthrough, which the lease permitted with 24 hours notice. I had sent a text the previous afternoon. No one had responded, but notice had been given. The front door was unlocked. The staging materials were stacked along one wall, organized and professional. Brittany ran a clean operation. I had always known that. But in the back room, a room I had not seen since the lease began, I found 2 filing cabinets, a desktop computer, and a printer. On the desk was a stack of invoices. Brittany's business wasn't just operating out of this space, it had expanded. She was running a secondary resale operation, furniture flipped and sold, from my property, beyond the scope of the original lease agreement, which specified home staging, supply storage, and consultation only. I photographed everything with my phone, quietly and carefully, as Gerald would have done. That afternoon, Kevin came to my house. He did not knock gently. He rang the doorbell 3 times, then knocked. I opened the door. He looked like he hadn't slept well. Brittany was in the car at the curb, which told me this had been planned. She'd sent him in first. "What is this, Mom?" He was holding the lease termination notice. His voice had that particular pitch, not quite raised but wound tight, the voice he had used as a teenager when he felt cornered. "You can't just... This is our livelihood. Brittany's business runs out of that space." "I know," I said calmly. "The lease termination gives you 30 days. 30 days is nothing. We'd need 6 months minimum to find a comparable." "That's not specified in the lease, Kevin." He stepped closer. I did not step back. "I need you to explain to me what is going on. Where is this coming from?" I looked at my son. This man I had loved since before he took his first breath. And I said steadily, "I was turned away from Thanksgiving. You told me I wasn't family." Something moved across his face. Not guilt. Calculation. "That was a misunderstanding," he said, using Brittany's word exactly. "You should have called..." "I brought the casserole, Kevin. The same casserole I have brought for 40 years. He changed directions. "You're hurting the children with this. Tyler and Madison love that space. They come there after school sometimes. They are welcome in my home anytime. You know where I live." His jaw tightened. "Brittany is not going to accept this. The notice is legal and properly executed. Susan Patel drafted it." That landed. He knew Susan. He knew she was precise. Then Brittany got out of the car. She walked up the driveway in that particular way of hers. Shoulders back, chin up. The walk of a woman who has decided to be formidable. She stopped at the foot of my porch steps. "Dorothy," she said, "I need you to understand that if you push this, we will have no choice but to involve our own attorney. We have grounds to contest this on the basis of verbal agreements and implied renewal." I had anticipated this. Susan had told me exactly what it meant legally. Very little, given that the lease was written as month to month with clear termination language. But Brittany did not know what Susan had told me. "You're welcome to do that," I said. "We could also stop the rent payments immediately, since you've terminated the lease anyway." "The lease runs through the notice period. Stopping payments early would constitute breach." She stared at me. I think she had expected tears or backtracking or the warm, accommodating woman who had always smoothed things over. "You've changed," she said, as though it were an accusation. "I've clarified," I said. Kevin put his hand on Brittany's arm. They exchanged a look. Then, without another word, they walked back to the car and drove away. I closed my front door. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the particular physical release of held tension. I sat down in Gerald's chair and breathed slowly for a few minutes. Then I called my sister, Carol, in Phoenix. "Dot," she said when I had told her everything. "I am so proud of you." That was enough. For the next 4 days, I did not check my phone more than once in the morning. I baked. I took long walks. I called Carol each evening. I read the novel I had been meaning to read for 3 months. I let myself rest. They were not resting. I knew that. But I also knew that exhausted people make poor decisions, and I intended to remain clear. On the 21st day of the notice period, Kevin tried a different approach. He came alone this time, on a Sunday morning, and he brought coffee from the bakery on Elm Street, the place I had taken him as a boy every Sunday after church. Dark roast for me, exactly as I liked it. It was a deliberate choice, and I recognized it as such. I let him in. I am not a woman who refuses coffee from her son on principle. I am a woman who listens carefully and keeps her hands warm. We sat at the kitchen table. He placed the cup in front of me with something that was almost gentleness. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "Good," I said. "Mom, I want to be honest with you." He turned his cup in his hands, a nervous habit since childhood. "Brittany and I have been under a lot of pressure. The business has been harder than we expected this year. We've had some financial strain, and I think it affected how we treated people, how I treated you." I drank my coffee and waited. "I was wrong," he said, "about Thanksgiving. It is a peculiar thing to hear your child say I was wrong. Even when the apology is incomplete, even when you can see the architecture of it, the careful words, the strategic timing, a part of you wants to fold. A part of you has been waiting years for exactly this." That part of me recognized his words and reached for them like a familiar warmth. I breathed through it. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. He leaned forward slightly. "So, you'll withdraw the notice?" And there it was. Not, "I miss you, Mom." Not, "I want my children to know their grandmother." The apology had been a corridor leading directly to the thing he needed from me, and we had reached the destination in under 4 minutes. "No," I said pleasantly. "I won't be withdrawing the notice." His expression shifted. A small, quickly controlled tightening. "Mom, we lose that space and Brittany's business loses half its operational capacity. We're talking real financial harm to our family." "I understand that. You'd do that to your own grandchildren?" I set down my cup. "Kevin, Tyler, and Madison are not in that building. Brittany's business is in that building. Those are different things, and I want to say clearly, I love my grandchildren. I have always loved them. If you'd like to bring them to visit me, my door is open. It has always been open." He sat with that for a moment. Then he tried one more angle. "We can increase the rent," he said. "Full market rate, $2,200 a month. And we can formalize everything with a proper term lease. 2 years. That gives you more security than month to month." It was objectively a reasonable financial offer. I recognized that. Susan would probably have called it fair. And that was precisely why I considered it carefully, sitting with my coffee, looking at my son across the table where he had grown up. But the offer was made because they needed the space. Not because anything had changed between us. Not because Brittany had called me to apologize. Not because Madison had been told to come see her grandmother. The rent offer was a transaction, and transactions were exactly what this relationship had been reduced to. I did not want a better transaction. I wanted something that a financial negotiation could not produce. "The notice stands," I said. Kevin left without the coffee cups. He left them on my table, both of them, and I washed them out and kept them because they were perfectly good cups, and waste is waste. That afternoon, I called my friend Louise, who had been my neighbor for 22 years before she moved to her daughter's place in Asheville. I had not spoken to Louise in 4 months. Life contracts around you sometimes without your noticing. I told her the whole story. She listened the way only old friends listen, without flinching, without advising, without making it about herself. You know what Gerald would have said, Louise said when I finished. He would have done the math first, I said. He would have done the math, and then he would have backed you completely. She paused. So do I. There is something that social support does to resolve. Not soften it, but stabilize it. Like ballast in a ship. I had been holding myself upright through will alone for 3 weeks. Hearing Louise's voice and Carol's, and even Susan's steady professional calm when I called to update her. It did not change my plan. It simply made it easier to carry. Kevin and Brittany, I learned later from a neighbor who knew their circle, had spent that week calling mutual acquaintances, framing the situation as a family misunderstanding that I was escalating unreasonably. They were building a narrative. I understood that, and I let them build it, because the truth was documented and the lease termination was legal, and no amount of narrative changes what is written and signed. I had 9 days left on the notice period. I spent them quietly, and I was not lonely. 3 days before the notice period expired, they came together. I was in the kitchen making soup. Nothing elaborate, just the chicken vegetable that I have made every winter for 40 years. When the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I saw Kevin's car in the driveway, and beside it, an unfamiliar silver sedan. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. Kevin and Brittany stood on the porch. Between them was a woman I recognized as Brittany's mother, Sandra. A tall woman in her early 70s with careful hair and the particular expression of someone who has decided to be reasonable at you. Behind Sandra stood Brittany's younger sister, Nicole. 4 of them, on my porch, unannounced. We thought it would help to talk as a family, Kevin said. I stood in my doorway and I thought, this is choreographed. The choice of Sandra was deliberate. A woman close to my age, meant to signal reasonableness, meant to invoke the idea that grandmothers should understand each other. Nicole was backup weight. The whole arrangement was a performance of family harmony designed to make me feel outnumbered and unreasonable for maintaining a boundary. I let them in, not out of weakness, because I wanted them to say what they'd come to say clearly in my house so I could hear all of it. Sandra spoke first, which told me who had designed this visit. Dorothy, she said, sitting at my kitchen table as though she had been there before. I think we're all just worried about the children. When families let legal matters override their relationships, it's always the little ones who suffer. It was elegantly constructed. It placed me in the position of the one escalating legal matters and invoked the children immediately, which was meant to activate guilt. I noticed all of this as clearly as if I were reading a map. Tyler and Madison are welcome here any time, I said. I've said that repeatedly. Brittany leaned forward. They don't feel comfortable, Dorothy, because of the tension you've created. You pulling back, refusing to communicate. It confuses children. I had not pulled back. I had stopped performing effort that was not reciprocated. But I understood she was reframing my withdrawal as aggression and her exclusion of me as my own fault. I came to Thanksgiving with a dish I had made with my own hands, I said, and I was told I wasn't family. I think that was confusing for everyone. Sandra made a gentle noise, not quite a sound, just a small management of the air. Kevin has told me there was a miscommunication about the invitation. There was no invitation, I said. There never needed to be in 40 years of Thanksgiving. This year there was a closed door and a 30-second conversation on a cold porch. That is what happened. Silence. Then Nicole spoke, and her voice had a different quality, less warm, more direct. We've talked to a property attorney. Good, I said. Susan Patel will be easy to reach. There may be grounds to claim the termination was retaliatory, Nicole said, connected to a family dispute rather than a legitimate business decision. I looked at her steadily. The lease is month to month. The notice period is 30 days. Both facts are written in the agreement Kevin signed. There is no legal requirement that a property owner justify their decision to terminate a month-to-month lease. Nicole held my gaze. A judge might see it differently. They might, I said. Judges can see anything. But Susan has seen the lease, the notice, and the documentation, and she is comfortable. Brittany stood abruptly. Her chair scraped back against the floor, and the sound broke the careful tone of the room. "This is vindictive," she said, and her voice had lost its management entirely. "You know exactly what you're doing. You're trying to hurt us because you have nothing else in your life." I felt the words land. I will not pretend otherwise. They were designed to find a soft place, and they found it. That deep, quiet fear that had been sitting in Gerald's chair with me since Thanksgiving night. The fear that perhaps I was alone, perhaps I was diminished, perhaps I mattered to no one. I let it be there for a moment. I acknowledged it, the way you acknowledge pain, not by performing wellness, but by breathing through it. Then I stood as well. "I think you should go," I said. My voice was steady. Kevin looked at me with something that might, in different circumstances, have been desperation. "Mom, you have 2 days left on the notice period," I said. "I would use them to begin making arrangements." They left. Sandra paused at the door. I think she wanted to say something that would soften the ending, but she looked at my face and said nothing. When the door closed, I stood in my kitchen, and I felt afraid. Not of them, exactly, but of what came next. Of the unfamiliar territory of a relationship that could not be repaired by my stepping back. I had never in my life let a wound stay open this long without reaching for the bandage. But the fear did not move me backward. It moved me forward, oddly and steadily, the way cold air sharpens your focus. I went back to my soup. I turned up the flame slightly. I called Susan in the morning. The notice period expired on a Friday. I had not heard from Kevin or Brittany in the 2 days since the visit. This told me they had consulted their attorney and been given a realistic picture. The termination was clean, the lease was clear, and they had no viable legal challenge. The silence was not peace. It was regrouping. Saturday morning, Kevin arrived at the Clover Street property with a rented truck and 2 men I didn't recognize. He was beginning to move Brittany's materials out. I was not there. I knew this because my neighbor Pauline, who lives across from the property and has very attentive curtains, texted me at 9 a.m. What I did not expect was the phone call I received that afternoon. It was from Tyler. My grandson, 14 years old, called me from what I recognized as the Clover Street number, the landline Kevin had installed for the business. His voice was uncomfortable, the voice of a boy who has been handed a script he knows is wrong. I could hear it in the way he paused before each sentence, the way children pause when they are reciting rather than speaking. Someone had told him what to say, perhaps word for word, and he was doing his best to say it convincingly. And he was not succeeding, because Tyler had always been a boy who told the truth badly when he tried to tell it falsely. "Grandma Dot," he said, "I wanted to tell you that I miss you, and I think what you're doing to our family is really hurtful." I held the phone for a moment. I felt the full weight of what was being done, not to me, but to this boy, who was 14 years old and being used as a negotiating tool by his own parents. That was the thing that settled something cold and permanent inside me. Not anger, but a kind of crystalline certainty about exactly who I was dealing with. "Tyler," I said softly, "I love you. I have always loved you. None of this, none of it, is about you." Mom and Dad said, "I know what they said." "Honey, can I ask you something? When did you last come to my house?" A pause. "I don't know, a while ago." Over a year, I said. Do you know whose decision that was? Silence. I want to see you, I said. Anytime you want to come, I am here. That has not changed, and it will not change. He was quiet for a long moment. Then very quietly, he said, I know. We said goodbye. I sat down. I understood now that we had reached the final phase. Kevin and Brittany had involved their children. That was the line, not because it changed my legal position, but because it revealed theirs completely. They were willing to use a 14-year-old boy's love for his grandmother as leverage. That told me everything I needed to know about how the next conversation would go. It told me, more than anything else that had happened, exactly how far they had traveled from the people I had wanted them to be. I called Susan that afternoon and said, I need to meet Monday. I want to discuss calling the loan balances. She was quiet for a moment. Dorothy, are you certain? That's a significant escalation. They put Tyler on the phone with me today, I said. Another pause. Monday at 10, she said. On Monday morning, I arrived at Susan's office with my documentation, organized in chronological order. We reviewed the loan agreements again. Both contained the acceleration clause. The combined balance outstanding was $16,840. If you call the balances, they have 60 days to pay in full, Susan said. Do they have that available? I don't know, I said. That's their problem to solve. She drafted the acceleration notices. I signed them, both sent certified mail by early afternoon. Then I drove to Clover Street. Kevin was there, directing the last of the move-out. When he saw my car, he stopped. He had not expected me. That was intentional. I had learned over the past weeks that arriving without announcement was its own form of clarity. It removed the time people spend preparing their faces. I walked up to him calmly. I had dressed carefully that morning, not formally, but neatly, the way Gerald always said made a person feel like themselves. Mom? His voice was wary. We're almost done here. We're complying. I know, I said. I appreciate it. He waited, uncertain. Behind him, one of the moving men carried a lamp through the front door and loaded it carefully into the truck. The ordinary sounds of a business being dismantled, the hiss of packing tape, the scrape of furniture legs on the floor. You'll be receiving 2 certified letters this week, I said. The loan acceleration notices, both balances called due in 60 days. The color shifted in his face. You can't. Mom, that's $16,840, I said. 60-day notice per the terms you signed. That will... He stopped, restarted. We don't have that. You know we don't have that. I know. Then why? His voice cracked slightly. Not into tears, into something rawer, closer to the surface. Why are you doing this? Is this about Thanksgiving? One day? You're burning our family down over one day? I looked at him for a long moment, standing on the street in front of the property I had owned for 22 years, beside the truck he had rented, with money that moved partially because I had never charged him what the market required. I thought about Gerald, who had bought that property with careful savings over 20 years, who had believed that what you build should serve the people who come after you, but not at the cost of being treated as invisible. Kevin, I said, this is about 44 months of being treated as optional. Thanksgiving was the day I saw it clearly. It was not the only day it happened. He started to speak. I'm not finished, I said, and he stopped. The moving men had paused. I did not lower my voice for their benefit. You told me I was not family. You used your son to call me and apply pressure. You sent your mother-in-law to my home unannounced. You tried to renegotiate from a position of generosity you never offered me in return. None of those are the actions of a family misunderstanding. They are the actions of people who believed I would always absorb whatever they needed me to absorb, that I had no limit, that my love was a resource with no bottom. Brittany had come out of the building. She stood behind Kevin, watching, her arms crossed against the cold. There was something different in her expression now. Not the managed reasonableness of the kitchen table visit, not the controlled anger of the porch. Something more exposed. She had not expected me to be this calm. She had built her understanding of me on the version of Dorothy Harris, who apologized, who softened, who found a way to make things comfortable for everyone at her own expense. That woman had not shown up today. "I'm done absorbing," I said. I got back in my car. My hands were perfectly steady. In the rearview mirror, I watched Kevin stand motionless on the sidewalk, the truck half loaded behind him, Brittany a few feet away and not moving toward him. Two people at the end of something, and neither of them reaching for the other. I pulled onto the road and drove home. The 60-day clock began, and Kevin and Brittany had no viable response to it. I want to tell you what happened practically, because practical things have a way of clarifying moral ones. Brittany's staging business was operating at a reduced capacity with materials crammed into their garage and one rented storage unit they'd secured in a hurry. The transition cost them significantly. I knew this not from Kevin, who had gone silent, but from the simple arithmetic of commercial storage rates in our area. They were paying more than double what they'd paid me, and they had lost the workspace that had allowed Brittany to run the resale operation. The resale operation, that was the other thing. When Susan reviewed the photographs I had taken during my walkthrough, she identified that the secondary business activity, the furniture resale, had likely generated income that should have been disclosed under the lease's use clause. She was careful, as she always is, to note that pursuing this legally would be expensive and uncertain. But she did send a letter to Kevin and Brittany's attorney, factually noting the discrepancy and attaching my photographic documentation. The purpose was clear. We were establishing a comprehensive record. If they chose litigation, they would not be entering it cleanly. Their attorney, I was told by Susan, advised them not to pursue the retaliatory termination claim. The risk, apparently, was not worth the cost. On the 58th day of the 60-day period, Kevin called me. It was a Sunday evening, 7 o'clock, and I was watching a film I had started 3 times before and never finished. I answered, "Mom." His voice was tired, not strategically tired, actually tired. The voice of a man who had spent 2 months in a situation he had created and could not exit gracefully. "We need to work out the loan repayment." "I'm listening," I said. "We don't have the full amount. You know that. I'm asking if there's a payment arrangement we can—" "Kevin," I said, "I would like to see my grandchildren." A pause. "That's a separate—" "It is not separate to me," I said. "You made my relationship with Tyler and Madison a tool in a negotiation. I am doing the same thing now. I would like Sunday dinners, regular ones. I would like to be called on holidays before those holidays arrive. I would like to be treated as a member of this family, not a utility." Silence. "Those things aren't hard, Kevin," I said. "They cost nothing. They are just the way families treat each other." "Brittany." "I am not negotiating with Brittany," I said. "I am talking to my son." A long pause. She'd have to agree. "I know, but I'm asking you what you want." He didn't answer immediately, and in that silence, I heard something I hadn't heard from him in a very long time. The absence of a strategy. He was not calculating. He was sitting with the question. "I want things to be okay," he said finally. "Then work on what is actually broken," I said. "Not the loan. The loan is manageable. What is broken between us is not a financial problem." He came over the following Saturday. Alone. Without calling first, which I have to say, I did not hold against him, because I had not held it against him for 40 years, and I was not about to start now. We sat at the kitchen table for almost 2 hours. He talked, and I listened. He said things that were true, and things that were partly true, and a few things that were clearly rehearsed. But underneath the rehearsed parts, there was a man who was genuinely afraid. Afraid that he had waited too long, that he had let Brittany's ambitions and his own passivity erode something he could not easily rebuild. I told him, "It is not gone, but it is not what it was. That will take time." He nodded. Regarding the loans, we restructured the repayment at a higher monthly amount that they could manage, still slower than I would have liked, but formalized now with an updated agreement that Susan drafted. The acceleration clause remained in the new agreement. Both parties understood its implications. Regarding Brittany, she did not come with Kevin that Saturday, or the Saturday after. On the third Saturday, she came. She sat across from me at the same table where she had placed her demands, and she was quieter than I had ever seen her. And she said, with difficulty, that she had not been fair to me. I accepted it without amplifying it. It was not a full accounting, and we both knew it, but it was a start, which is different from nothing. Tyler came the following weekend. He stayed for 3 hours, ate 2 bowls of chicken vegetable soup, and showed me a video game he was developing for a class project. Madison came a week after that and asked me to teach her the sweet potato casserole recipe. I taught her. I stood next to her in my kitchen, my granddaughter's hands learning Gerald's mother's recipe, and I thought, this is what I was fighting for. Not the property, not the money. This. The winter after everything happened was the best winter I had spent alone since Gerald died. I say alone, and I mean it differently now than I would have before. I was alone in the way that people who have chosen their lives are alone. Not abandoned, not diminished, but moving through my days with a clarity and a satisfaction that I had not known I was missing until I found it again. Every Sunday, I made dinner. Not always for anyone besides myself. But the habit of cooking for a proper meal at a proper table, which I had let slip in the years of hoping to be included elsewhere, came back to me, and it felt like recovering a language I had almost forgotten. About once a month, Kevin and Tyler and Madison came to Sunday dinner. Sometimes Kevin came alone. Occasionally, Brittany joined them, though she was stilted and uncomfortable in a way that I suspected would take a long time to work through, if it worked through at all. I did not push. I had learned that I could not manufacture warmth I had not been given, and that accepting its absence clearly was more honest than performing its presence. Carol came to visit in January. She stayed for 10 days, which was the longest visit we had shared since we were girls in our parents' house. We went to the museum, we cooked elaborate dinners, we watched old films, and we talked, really talked, the way sisters do when they stop being careful with each other. She told me she had been worried about me for years. Not worried I was in danger, but worried I had made myself so small trying to fit into Kevin's version of the family that I had forgotten what I was like when I was full-sized. She was right. Louise came up from Asheville for a long weekend in March. My neighbor Pauline, who had been a distant acquaintance for years, became a genuine friend over the course of that spring. Partly because she had watched the whole situation unfold with characteristic attentiveness from behind her curtains, and partly because she was funny and warm and had opinions about everything, which I found restoring. I joined a book club at the library. I started volunteering on Saturday mornings at the food bank, where Gerald had volunteered for years before his heart gave out. Both of these things sound modest written down, but they were not modest in their effect. I was among people who knew nothing of Kevin or Brittany, who had no stake in my family dynamics, who simply found me interesting company. The ordinariness of being liked without complication was quietly extraordinary. Regarding Kevin and Brittany's circumstances, I did not take satisfaction in their difficulties, but I also did not look away from them, because looking away would have been a kind of dishonesty. Brittany's staging business continued to struggle after the move. The arrangement at Clover Street had been more foundational to her operations than even I had understood, and the transition, combined with the loan repayment schedule and the loss of the below-market rent, put a real strain on their finances. Brittany took on a second job, part-time retail, which I knew about from Tyler, who mentioned it in the matter-of-fact way. Teenagers report family facts. She was working harder than she had in years. I did not know if that would change her or not. People sometimes change under pressure, and sometimes they simply become more pressurized. Kevin was promoted at his job in the spring, which helped them financially. I was glad for it. I want to be clear about that. I was genuinely glad because he is my son, and his financial security is connected to my grandchildren's stability. And I do not wish harm on the people I love, even when they have harmed me. What I noticed, though, and this is the thing that strikes me still, is that the version of Kevin who came to my Sunday dinners was different from the version I had known for the past several years. He was less polished, less strategic, less careful. He laughed more readily. He admitted to things going wrong without reframing them as successes. He asked me questions about his father that he had never asked before, as though the distance between us had, paradoxically, made it safe to be curious. I did not know if Brittany and Kevin would find their way back to something solid. That was genuinely their work to do, not mine. What I knew was that Tyler came to my house with increasing regularity, sometimes texting first and sometimes just appearing at the door, and that Madison had begun calling me every Thursday evening from her room just to talk. One evening in April, I was sitting in Gerald's chair reading, and my phone rang, and it was Madison, and she said, "Grandma Dot, I made the casserole tonight, and Tyler said it was almost as good as yours." And I laughed out loud in my quiet house, alone and absolutely fine. That was my life. That was the life on the other side of the closed door. It turned out to be considerable. Here is what I learned from all of it. When someone shows you that your love is a convenience to them, believe them the first time. Not bitterly, clearly. Clarity is not the same as coldness. And when you stop making yourself small to fit someone else's comfort, you find out how much room you actually take up. It turns out I take up quite a lot. So I ask you, if someone told you that you were not family, at your own table, in your own story, what would you do? Think about that. And if this story stayed with you, leave a comment and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening.